Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the journey ahead. My name is Harold Brennan, and at 80 years old, I thought I'd heard everything. I thought I'd seen it all. But that Tuesday afternoon in October, sitting in my favorite recliner with my afternoon coffee, I heard 5 words that would shatter my world. You can double the dose. The voice belonged to my son, Marcus, 50 years old, successful, married with 2 kids of his own. He was standing in my kitchen, talking low into his phone, thinking I couldn't hear him through the thin walls of this old house Eleanor and I have called home for 43 years. You can double the dose, he repeated, his voice strained with something I'd never heard before, desperation mixed with resignation. My coffee cup trembled in my hands. Those words, God help me, those words took me back to a place I'd buried so deep I thought it would never surface again. Back to 1968, when I was a young man broken by Vietnam, when I'd whispered similar words to dealers in dark alleys, when I'd traded my soul for anything that would make the nightmares stop. I set the cup down carefully, my arthritic fingers shaking not from age, but from the memories flooding back, the taste of shame. Metallic and bitter filled my mouth. Had I failed him? Had I failed as a father so completely that my boy, my Marcus, had followed the same dark path that nearly destroyed me? Through the doorway, I watched him pace the kitchen floor like a caged animal. His once confident shoulders were hunched. His expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. This wasn't the successful insurance executive who'd made me proud at every company dinner, every graduation, every milestone. This was a man carrying a weight that was crushing him. I understand, Marcus said into the phone, his voice barely above a whisper. Same time next week, yes, I'll have it. The line went dead, and I watched my son, my baby boy, who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, lean against the counter and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs that cut through my heart like a rusty blade. I wanted to stand up, to go to him, to wrap him in my arms like I did when he was 7 and had scraped his knee. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, because in that moment, I was seeing myself 57 years ago, making the same desperate calls, promising the same desperate payments, sinking deeper into a hole I thought would swallow me whole. Eleanor's voice drifted from upstairs where she was folding laundry. Harold, is Marcus staying for dinner? I cleared my throat, trying to find my voice. I don't know, honey. Marcus straightened up quickly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He walked into the living room, and for a moment, our eyes met. I saw fear there, and guilt, and something else that made my stomach turn, the look of a man who'd lost all hope. Dad, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't know you were there. I'm always here, son, I replied, my voice hoarse with emotion I couldn't hide. You know that. But as I looked at him, really looked at him, I wondered if I'd ever truly been there at all. Had I been so focused on building a respectable life, on burying my own demons, that I'd missed the signs that my boy was drowning? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. 50 years of love, of pride, of thinking I'd broken the cycle of addiction that had plagued my family for generations. And now, with those 5 words still echoing in my ears, I realized that maybe I'd been living a lie. Marcus cleared his throat. I should go. Tell Mom I'll call her later. As he headed for the door, I wanted to call out, to demand answers, to shake him until he told me the truth. But the words stuck in my throat like concrete, because deep down, I was terrified of what that truth might be. The front door closed with a soft click, and I was alone with my memories and my fears. Outside, his car engine started, and I listened to the sound fade into the distance, taking with it the sun I thought I knew. I sat there as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the room where I'd raised my children, where I'd built what I thought was a legacy of redemption. But those 5 words kept echoing in my mind. And with them came a terrible question that would haunt me for days to come. What dose was my son doubling, and how long had he been walking down the same dark road that had nearly killed me? You want to know how I recognized the desperation in my son's voice? Because I'd lived it. Because 57 years ago, I was the one making those same hushed phone calls, promising payments I couldn't afford, agreeing to terms that would destroy me, piece by piece. It was 1968 when I came back from Vietnam. I was 23 years old and carrying more ghosts than a man twice my age should bear. The nightmares came every night, the sound of mortars, the screams of my buddies, the smell of napalm that seemed permanently burned into my nostrils. The doctors at the VA hospital handed me pills like candy. Take these for sleep, Harold. Take these for the shakes. Take these when the memories won't stop. But pills weren't enough. They never are when you're trying to outrun the devil himself. I met Eleanor in 1969 at a church social. She was 21, fresh out of nursing school, with blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold and eyes blue enough to drown in. She saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Hope, maybe, or just stubborn determination to be better than what the war had made me. "You're fighting something," she told me on our third date as we sat on her parents' porch swing. Her hand was soft in mine, steady and warm. "But you don't have to fight it alone." I wanted to tell her about the pills I'd started buying from a guy named Jimmy who hung around the pool hall downtown. I wanted to confess that sometimes I took double what the doctors prescribed just to feel nothing for a few hours. But she looked at me with such faith, such pure belief that I could be the man she saw, that I swallowed the words like poison. We married in 1971. Small ceremony, just our families and a few friends. Eleanor wore her grandmother's dress, and when she walked down that aisle toward me, I made a promise to myself and to God that I would be worthy of her love, that I would beat the darkness that was trying to consume me. Marcus was born in 1974, and the moment they placed him in my arms, everything changed. He was so small, so perfect, with these tiny fingers that wrapped around my thumb, like he was anchoring himself to me. I looked down at his sleeping face and felt something I hadn't felt since before the war. Pure, uncomplicated love. "He's going to be something special," Eleanor whispered from her hospital bed. Exhausted, but radiant. "He's going to be better than me," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. That night, I went home and flushed every pill down the toilet. The withdrawal nearly killed me. 3 days of sweating, shaking, and seeing things that weren't there. Eleanor thought I had the flu. I let her believe it, but when I came out the other side, I was clean. For my son, I was clean. The years that followed were good ones. I got a job at the railroad, worked my way up to supervisor. We bought this house in 1982, a modest 2-story with a big backyard where Marcus could play. Eleanor planted roses by the front steps and made curtains for every window. We were building something real, something lasting. Marcus was everything I'd hoped he'd be. Smart as a whip, kind-hearted, ambitious but not cruel about it. He played baseball in high school, made decent grades, never gave us a moment's trouble. When he graduated from college with his business degree, I sat in that auditorium and felt pride so fierce it almost choked me. "You did it, Dad," he said that day, his diploma in one hand and his other arm around my shoulders. "You broke the cycle." I thought I had. God help me. I really thought I had. He married Sarah in 1998, a sweet girl from a good family. They gave us 2 beautiful grandchildren, Tyler, who's 25 now and works in computers, and little Emma, who just turned 22 and is finishing college. Family dinners every Sunday, holidays together, vacation trips to the lake. This was my legacy. This was my redemption. A son who'd never known the darkness that had nearly consumed me. Grandchildren who would grow up in the light I'd worked so hard to build. But sitting in my chair yesterday, hearing those words, "You can double the dose," I realized that maybe I'd been fooling myself all along. Maybe the darkness hadn't been beaten. Maybe it had just been waiting, patient as a spider in its web. For the next generation, the pills I'd flushed in 1974 were supposed to be the end of it, the last chapter in a story of addiction that went back generations in my family. My grandfather died of alcohol poisoning when I was 10. My father spent more time at the bar than at home. I was supposed to be the one who stopped it. Eleanor found me in my chair an hour after Marcus left, staring at nothing. "Harold, you look like you've seen a ghost." "More than one," I wanted to tell her. "But how do you explain to your wife of 54 years that the ghost you thought you'd buried might be haunting your son now? How do you tell the woman who saved your life that you might have failed to save the life that mattered most?" "Just thinking about Marcus," I said instead. "He seemed troubled." Eleanor settled into her chair beside me, her knitting in her lap. "He's been working too hard lately. Sarah mentioned he's been staying late at the office, taking calls at all hours. Late-night calls, just like I used to make." The parallel hit me like a punch to the gut. That night, I lay awake listening to Eleanor's peaceful breathing and thinking about cycles, how they repeat, how they find ways to continue, even when you think you've broken them. Somewhere in the darkness of our quiet house, I could almost hear the echo of those 5 words. "You can double the dose." And I knew that tomorrow I would have to find the courage to discover what dose my son was doubling and whether the demons I'd fought so hard to defeat had found their way into his life after all. The next morning, I woke up before dawn like I have every day since Vietnam. Old habits die hard, and the habit of being hypervigilant dies hardest of all. Eleanor was still sleeping, her silver hair spread across the pillow like moonlight. At 78, she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I made coffee in the dark kitchen, my movements automatic after decades of the same routine. But my mind wasn't on the familiar ritual. It was replaying every interaction I'd had with Marcus over the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed, clues I'd been too blind or too trusting to see. There had been things, small things that I'd dismissed as the stress of middle age, the pressures of modern life that seemed so much more complicated than anything Eleanor and I had faced when we were building our life together. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had come by on a Saturday morning, which was unusual. He typically visited on Sundays with Sarah and the kids for our family dinner. But that morning, he'd shown up alone, agitated, checking his phone every few minutes. "Everything all right, son?" I'd asked, handing him a cup of coffee. "Fine, Dad. Just work stuff." He'd forced that same hollow smile I'd seen yesterday. "You know how it is. The insurance business never sleeps." But I'd noticed his hands shaking slightly as he lifted the coffee cup to his lips. I'd chalked it up to too much caffeine, maybe not enough sleep. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. Withdrawal, maybe, or the jitters that come from living on the edge of desperation. Then there was the incident 2 months ago. Marcus had asked to borrow $5,000, said it was for some home improvements Sarah wanted. New kitchen cabinets, updated appliances. Eleanor and I had been happy to help. Our son had always been responsible with money, had never asked us for anything since he'd graduated college and got his first job. "You sure this is enough?" I'd asked, writing out the check. "We can manage more if you need it." The look of relief on his face had been so profound that it startled me, like a drowning man who'd just been thrown a life preserver. "No, Dad, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need." He'd hugged me then, longer and tighter than usual. At the time, I'd thought it was gratitude. Now I wondered if it was goodbye, the embrace of a man who knew he was about to disappoint someone he loved. He'd paid us back within a month, just like he'd promised. But I remembered thinking at the time that he looked worse when he returned the money than he had when he'd asked for it. Thinner, more drawn, like something was eating him from the inside. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured myself a cup, adding the single spoonful of sugar that Eleanor had been trying to get me to give up for 20 years. Some habits are worth keeping, I'd always told her. Now I wondered which of my habits, good and bad, I'd passed on to my son without meaning to. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from Tyler, my grandson. "Grandpa, have you talked to Dad lately? Mum's worried about him. He's been acting strange." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Even Sarah had noticed. Even the kids could see that something was wrong with Marcus. How had I missed it for so long? How had I been so focused on my own past demons that I'd failed to recognize them when they came for my son? I texted back, "What kind of strange, Tyler?" The response came quickly. "Jumpy, paranoid, keeps checking his phone and going outside to take calls. And Grandpa, he's lost weight. A lot of weight. Weight loss, paranoia, secret phone calls. The pattern was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I'd lived it, breathed it, nearly died from it 57 years ago. But I'd convinced myself that my vigilance, my example, my love would be enough to protect Marcus from the same fate. Pride, that's what it was. The sin that the Bible warns about, the one that comes before the fall. I'd been so proud of breaking the cycle, so convinced of my own success as a father, that I'd stopped watching for the signs that the cycle might be starting again. Eleanor's footsteps on the stairs broke me out of my thoughts. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her old blue robe, her hair slightly mussed, looking every bit as lovely as she had 40 years ago. "You're up early even for you," she said, kissing my cheek as she passed by to start her own morning routine. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She paused, studying my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd been reading my moods for more than half a century. "This is about Marcus, isn't it? About yesterday." Eleanor had always been able to see straight through me. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and one of the things that terrified me most about what I might have to tell her. "I think," I started, then stopped. "How do you tell your wife that you suspect your son is following the same destructive path you once walked? How do you admit that your greatest fear, that the darkness you'd fought so hard to escape might claim the next generation, might be coming true?" "I think he might be in trouble," I finally said. Eleanor poured herself coffee and sat down across from me at the little breakfast table where we'd shared thousands of meals, discussed countless problems, planned our entire life together. Her blue eyes, still sharp despite her age, fixed on mine with the intensity I remembered from her nursing days when she was assessing a patient's condition. "What kind of trouble?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I just stared at it, paralyzed by the fear of what he might say, what I might hear in his voice. "Answer it," Eleanor said softly. I swiped to accept the call. "Hello, son." "Dad?" Marcus's voice was strained, exhausted. In the background I could hear traffic, like he was calling from his car. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My chest tightened. "Of course, Marcus. What is it?" There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you ever do anything really bad that you thought would destroy our family if anyone found out?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor's eyes widened, and I knew she could hear the desperation in his voice, even through the phone. "Marcus," I said carefully, "where are you? Are you safe? Just answer me, Dad, please. I need to know if you ever made mistakes that came back to haunt you, mistakes that could hurt the people you love." And in that moment, I realized that whatever was happening to my son, whatever dose he was doubling, it might not be drugs at all. It might be something worse. It might be secrets. And secrets, I knew from experience, could be more addictive and more destructive than any substance ever created. "Son, where are you right now?" I asked again, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. Eleanor leaned closer, her face etched with the same worry that was gnawing at my gut. I'm in the parking lot outside your house, Dad. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to come in." Eleanor and I exchanged glances. She moved to the window and peered through the curtains. "He's there," she whispered. "Oh, Harold, he looks terrible." I could hear it in his breathing, that ragged, desperate sound of a man who'd been holding his breath for too long, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew that sound. I'd made it myself, many times in the dark years before Eleanor saved me. "Come inside, Marcus. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The line went quiet for a moment, then I heard his car door slam. Eleanor hurried to unlock the front door before he could even reach it. When Marcus stepped into our kitchen, I had to bite back a gasp. Tyler had been right. Marcus had lost significant weight. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. But it was the look in his eyes that broke my heart, the same haunted expression I'd seen in my own mirror all those years ago. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking like a teenager's, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me you won't hate me when you hear it." Eleanor moved to put her arms around him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "No, Mom, not until you know. Not until you both know what kind of man your son really is." I stood up slowly, my old bones protesting. "Marcus, sit down. Let's talk about this like a family." "You don't understand." The words exploded out of him with such force that Eleanor jumped. "I've ruined everything, Dad. Everything you built, everything you worked for, everything you sacrificed to give me. I've destroyed it all." My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments. The phone call yesterday. You can double the dose. The question about whether I'd ever done anything that could destroy our family. The weight loss, the paranoia, the desperate look of a man backed into a corner. "Tell me," I said simply. Marcus collapsed into one of our kitchen chairs like a marionette whose strings had been cut. For a long moment, he just sat there, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Do you remember Robert Kessler?" he finally asked. The name hit me like a punch to the stomach. Robert Kessler, my old sergeant from Vietnam, one of the few men from my unit who'd made it home alive. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, Christmas cards mostly. The occasional phone call when one of our mutual friends passed away. "Of course I remember Bobby," I said carefully. "We served together." "Why?" Marcus looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "He contacted me 6 months ago. Said he had some information about your time in Vietnam, about something that happened over there that could destroy your reputation, our family's reputation." The room seemed to tilt around me. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "What kind of information?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Part of me had been waiting for this day for 57 years. "He said he knew about the drugs, Dad, about what you did to get them, about the deals you made with the enemy." There it was. The thing I'd buried so deep, I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. The shame I'd carried like a cancer in my chest for more than half a century. The reason I'd fought so hard to build a clean life, a respectable life, a life worthy of redemption. Eleanor's face had gone pale. "Harold, what is he talking about?" I couldn't look at her. Couldn't bear to see the disappointment, the disgust, the shattering of 54 years of trust. Instead, I kept my eyes on Marcus. "How much does he want?" "It started at 5,000, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The money you loaned me for the house, I thought if I paid him once, he'd go away, but he didn't. He came back for more and more. Every month, Dad. Every month he calls and says the same thing. You can double the dose, or I can double the damage." The phrase made sense now. Horrible, twisted sense. Not drugs, money, not addiction, extortion. My son wasn't using, he was being used. By someone who knew the darkest secret of my past and was willing to destroy my family to profit from it. "How much have you paid him?" I asked. $37,000, Marcus said, and the number hung in the air like a death sentence. "I've mortgaged everything, Dad. The house, my retirement, Sarah's college fund. I've been working double shifts, taking consulting jobs on weekends, anything to keep up with his demands. But it's never enough. It's never going to be enough." Eleanor finally found her voice. "Harold, what did you do in Vietnam? What could be so terrible that someone would—" "I traded military intelligence for drugs," I said, the words coming out like broken glass. "Information about troop movements, supply routes, patrol schedules. I was so messed up, so desperate for anything to make the pain stop, that I sold out my own country, my own brothers." The confession hung between us like a toxic cloud. Eleanor's face crumpled, and she sank into her chair as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Marcus looked at me with a mixture of horror and something else. Relief, maybe, that the secret was finally out in the open. People died because of what I did, I continued, forcing myself to meet Eleanor's eyes. Good men, American soldiers, died because I gave the enemy information in exchange for pills. I've lived with that knowledge every day for 57 years. It's why I got clean. It's why I worked so hard to be a better man, a better husband, a better father. Because I knew that someday, somehow, I'd have to pay for what I did. Eleanor was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. But she wasn't looking at me with disgust or hatred. She was looking at me with heartbreak, for the young man I'd been, for the pain that had driven me to make such terrible choices, for the burden I'd carried alone all these years. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Oh, because I was a coward," I said simply. "Because I was afraid you'd leave me. Because I thought if I could just be good enough, love you enough, build something beautiful enough, maybe I could earn forgiveness for the unforgivable." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Kessler said he'd go to the newspapers. Dad, to the VA, to your old railroad friends. He said he'd make sure everyone knew what you did. He said he'd destroy not just your reputation, but mine too. My job, Sarah's career, the kids' futures. He said the sins of the father would fall on all of us." And there it was, the true poison of Bobby Kessler's extortion. Not just the threat to expose my past, but the promise to punish my family for my sins, to make my children and grandchildren pay for choices I'd made before they were even born. "How long?" I asked. "How long has this been going on?" 6 months, Marcus said. 6 months of living in hell, of lying to Sarah, of watching you and Mom at Sunday dinners, and knowing that I was the one putting your whole life at risk. Every time he calls, every time he demands more money, he reminds me that one word from him could destroy everything you've built." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady but my resolve hardening with each breath. 57 years ago, I'd made the worst decision of my life, because I was weak, because I was desperate, because I was more afraid of pain than I was of dishonor. But I wasn't that broken young man anymore. I was 80 years old. I'd lived a life of redemption, and I'd be damned if I'd let Bobby Kessler destroy my family to profit from my ancient shame. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady for the first time since this nightmare began. "You're not paying him another cent." "Dad, you don't understand." "No, son, you don't understand." I reached out and took his hand, the same hand that had once wrapped around my finger when he was a newborn, anchoring himself to me. "This isn't your burden to carry. These aren't your sins to pay for. If Bobby Kessler wants to destroy Harold Brennan, then he can face Harold Brennan, not my son, not my family." Eleanor stood up and moved to my side, her hand finding mine with the same certainty it had 54 years ago, when she'd chosen to love a broken man and help him become whole. "What are we going to do?" she asked. And for the first time in days I smiled, not the hollow smile Marcus had been giving us, but a real smile, the smile of a man who'd finally found his way back to the light. "We're going to fight," I said, "together." The phone rang at exactly 3:17 p.m., just like Marcus said it would. We'd been sitting in my living room for hours, planning, strategizing, trying to figure out how to deal with a man who'd turned my past into my son's prison. When Marcus's cell phone buzzed on the coffee table, we all froze. "It's him," Marcus whispered, his face going pale. "It's Kessler." "Answer it," I said. "But put it on speaker. I want to hear the voice of the man who's been terrorizing my family." Marcus's hand shook as he swiped to accept the call. "Hello, Robert." Well, Marcus." The voice that came through the speaker was older, rougher than I remembered, but unmistakably Bobby Kessler. Hearing it after all these years was like being punched in the chest by a ghost. Right on time. I do appreciate punctuality in my business partners. "What do you want this time?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Straight to business. I like that. Here's the thing, Marcus. My financial situation has taken a turn for the worse. Medical bills, you understand. Cancer's expensive, even with VA benefits, so I'm afraid our usual arrangement isn't going to cut it anymore." Eleanor gripped my hand tighter. Even through the phone, we could hear the cruel satisfaction in Bobby's voice. He was enjoying this, savoring the power he held over us. "How much?" Marcus asked. 50,000 by Friday. The number hit us like a thunderbolt. Marcus went white as a sheet. "Robert, I don't have $50,000. I've already given you everything I have. My house is mortgaged to the hilt. My savings are gone." "That's not my problem, son." Bobby's voice turned cold, menacing. "See, I've been thinking about your daddy lately, wondering how the fine folks at the Brennan family church would react to learning that their most respected elder once sold out American soldiers for a handful of pills. Wondering how it would affect your pretty wife's teaching career when word gets out that she's married to the son of a traitor." I couldn't stay silent anymore. I reached over and took the phone from Marcus's trembling hands. "Hello, Bobby," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Bobby finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Surprise mixed with something that might have been fear. "Well, I'll be damned. Harry Brennan himself. I was wondering when you'd finally grow a pair and face me." "It's been a long time, Sergeant," I said, using his old rank deliberately, "though I have to say this isn't quite the reunion I would have expected." "Life's full of surprises, isn't it, Harry? Like the surprise I felt when I found those old military records in my attic. Fascinating reading, especially the reports about information leaks in our sector and the timeline of when certain patrols got ambushed right after you'd had your little meetings with your Vietnamese friends." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you want, Bobby?" "I want what's owed to me. Harry, I want compensation for keeping my mouth shut about your little wartime indiscretions. 50 years I've stayed quiet. 50 years I've watched you build this perfect little life while I've struggled with nightmares and guilt and the knowledge that the man everyone thinks is a hero is really a traitor. And what makes you think you deserve compensation for that?" Bobby laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. "Because I was there, Harry. I saw what you did. I watched you meet with that Vietnamese contact near the river. I followed you that night in December of '68 when you handed over the patrol schedules for Charlie Company." My blood ran cold. Charlie Company? 12 good men who'd walked into an ambush on December 15th, 1968. Only 4 had made it back alive. For 57 years, I'd told myself that maybe my information hadn't led to that massacre. Maybe it was just bad luck, poor intelligence, one of the 1,000 random tragedies that defined that war. But Bobby knew. He'd seen me make the trade that killed those men. "I see you remember now," Bobby continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Funny how the memory works, isn't it? How we can convince ourselves that maybe we didn't do what we know we did. But I was there, Harry. I saw you take those pills from the enemy agent. I saw you hand over the papers. And I saw what happened to Charlie Company 3 days later. Eleanor's face had gone ashen. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. And I felt the weight of 57 years of buried guilt crushing down on my chest like a boulder. "So here's what's going to happen," Bobby continued. "Your boy is going to get me $50,000 by Friday, or I'm going to make some very interesting phone calls. The Washington Post might be interested in a story about a Vietnam veteran who's been living a lie for half a century. The local news stations would probably love to interview the families of Charlie Company about how they feel knowing their loved ones died because Harold Brennan needed his fix." "You son of a bitch," I whispered. Now, Harry. Language. We're both old men now. Grandfathers, I assume. Wouldn't want to set a bad example." That's when the second shoe dropped, the real revelation that made everything else pale in comparison. "Of course," Bobby continued, his voice taking on a tone of mock sympathy. "I should probably mention that you weren't the only one making deals back then. Were you, Harry?" My stomach lurched. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come now, don't tell me you've forgotten our little partnership. You weren't working alone, Harry. You had help. You had someone feeding you information about which patrols to target, which supply routes to compromise. Someone with access to higher-level intelligence than a grunt like you could ever get." The room started spinning around me. "Bobby, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Lieutenant Morrison, you remember good old Lieutenant Morrison, don't you? wasn't quite the war hero everyone thought he was. He was your contact inside the command structure. He was the one giving you the really valuable intelligence to trade. And guess what, Harry? I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because I suddenly understood where this was going, and it was worse than anything I could have imagined. Lieutenant Morrison survived the war, Bobby said, his voice now positively gleeful with malicious triumph. Changed his name after his discharge, started a new life, built a respectable career, even got elected to some important positions over the years, became quite the pillar of his community. No, I whispered. Oh yes. And the best part, he's been paying me to keep quiet about his little wartime activities for the past 15 years. Much more reliable than your son, I have to say. Much deeper pockets. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. All these years I'd thought I was the only one. I'd thought the guilt was mine alone to bear. But there had been someone else. Someone higher up the chain. Someone with access to the intelligence that had gotten Charlie Company killed. And Bobby Kessler had been blackmailing both of us. Here's the thing, Harry, Bobby continued. Lieutenant Morrison, though that's not what he calls himself anymore, has been very generous over the years. But he's getting old, and his generosity is starting to wane. So I figured it was time to diversify my income stream. Enter your son and his very touching desire to protect Daddy's reputation. I could barely find my voice. Who is he, Bobby? What's his real name now? Bobby laughed. Oh, Harry, you really don't know, do you? After all these years, you never figured it out. That's beautiful. That's just beautiful. And then he told me a name that made my world collapse entirely. A name that changed everything I thought I knew about my past, my present, and the man I'd spent 57 years trying to become. A name that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Judge William Ashford, Bobby said, and the name hit me like a bullet to the chest. Eleanor gasped. Marcus's face went from pale to grey, and I felt 57 years of carefully constructed reality crumble around me, like a house of cards in a hurricane. Judge William Ashford, the man who'd presided over our local county court for 23 years before retiring with full honours. The man who'd been featured on the front page of our local newspaper as Veteran of the Year just 5 years ago. The man who'd given the eulogy at my railroad supervisor's funeral, speaking eloquently about honor, duty, and the sacrifices good men make for their communities. The man who'd sat in the front pew of our church every Sunday for the past 15 years, just 3 rows ahead of Eleanor and me. The man I'd shaken hands with countless times at community events, veterans gatherings, and church socials. The man whose granddaughter had been in Sunday school with my own grandchildren, Lieutenant Morrison, the officer who'd fed me the intelligence that I'd traded for drugs, the real architect of the betrayal that had gotten Charlie Company killed. I can hear those wheels turning in your head. Harry, Bobby continued, clearly savouring my shock. Small world, isn't it? All these years you've been sitting behind the man who was your partner in treason, singing hymns together, praying together, probably even sharing coffee and donuts at the church social. Beautiful irony. You're lying, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he wasn't. Too many pieces were suddenly falling into place. Ashford's reaction whenever Vietnam was mentioned in conversation, the way his face would tighten, how he'd quickly change the subject. The fact that despite his decorated military record, he never talked about specific battles or operations. The way he'd sometimes look at me during church services, as if he were studying my face, trying to read my thoughts. Am I lying, Harry? Think about it. How would a grunt like you have had access to the kind of detailed intelligence you were trading? Patrol routes, supply schedules, communications frequencies. That wasn't information available to someone at your pay grade. You needed someone higher up the food chain, someone with access to command briefings. Eleanor found her voice. Harold, what is he talking about? What intelligence? I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the confusion and growing horror in her eyes. I told you I traded military information for drugs. What I didn't tell you was how detailed that information was, how specific, how valuable. Valuable enough to get a lot of good men killed, Bobby added helpfully. Valuable enough to turn the tide of several major operations in favor of the enemy. Valuable enough to make both Harry and Lieutenant Morrison very wealthy in terms of the pills and heroin they were getting in exchange. Marcus spoke for the first time since I'd taken the phone. Dad, how long did this go on? The question hung in the air like a death sentence, because the answer was worse than anything I'd admitted to so far. 6 months, I said quietly. From July 1968 to January 1969. Every week, sometimes twice a week. Morrison would pass me intelligence during our regular briefings, and I would trade it at the river crossing. 6 months, Eleanor repeated, her voice hollow. Harold, how many soldiers died because of what you did? I closed my eyes, seeing the faces that had haunted my dreams for 57 years. 43 confirmed, maybe more. The number fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock and revulsion through my family. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath sounded like a sob. Marcus buried his face in his hands. 43, Bobby said, his voice full of mock sympathy. 43 young men who never made it home to their families. 43 mothers who got folded flags instead of living sons. Also Harry Brennan and William Ashford could get high. That's enough, I said, my voice harder than it had been in years. Oh, I'm just getting started, Harry. See, here's the beautiful part of this whole situation. Judge Ashford has been paying me $15,000 every 6 months for the past 15 years. Like clockwork. Very reliable, very professional, but he's getting old and his health isn't what it used to be. Last time we talked, he mentioned something about getting his affairs in order. Sounded to me like a man thinking about confessing his sins before he meets his maker. The implication was clear. If Ashford was planning to come clean about his past, Bobby would lose his most reliable source of income, which explained why he'd suddenly escalated his demands on Marcus. So I figured I needed to diversify my portfolio, Bobby continued. That's when I remembered old Harry Brennan and started doing some research on his family. Imagine my delight when I discovered that Harold Brennan's son was a successful insurance executive with a lot to lose if Daddy's war record became public knowledge. What do you want? I asked again, though I already knew the answer. I want security, Harry. I want to know that when Judge Ashford inevitably decides to purge his soul and confess his sins, I'll still have a reliable income stream. I want your family to step up and take over his payments, $15,000 every 6 months, just like the good judge has been providing. That's $30,000 a year, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Good math skills. I can see why you're successful in business. And here's the best part. It's actually a bargain compared to what the judge has been paying. He started at $10,000 every 6 months, but inflation, you understand. Medical costs. The price of keeping quiet goes up every year. Eleanor stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. How could you do this to people? How could you profit from something so evil? Bobby's voice turned cold. How could I profit from it? Lady, I was there. I watched these two sell out their own country, their own brothers for drugs. I could have reported them, I could have saved lives, but I was young and stupid and scared. So I kept my mouth shut and watched good men die. For 50 years, I've lived with that guilt. For 50 years, I've had nightmares about Charlie Company and all the others. So excuse me if I don't feel bad about making the men responsible pay for my silence. The twisted logic was almost convincing. Almost, but I could hear something else in Bobby's voice, something that told me this wasn't really about guilt or justice or even money. You're enjoying this, I said. Damn right I'm enjoying it. Do you have any idea what it's been like watching you two live your perfect little lives? Ashford becoming a respected judge, you becoming the community's favorite war hero, both of you getting honored at veterans events, while I struggled with PTSD and disability payments. Both of you building these beautiful families, while I drank myself into 3 failed marriages and a liver transplant. There it was. The real poison driving Bobby Kessler's vendetta. Not justice, not guilt, envy, pure corrosive envy for the lives that Eleanor and I had built despite my past sins. The difference between us, Bobby, I said quietly, is that I tried to make amends. I tried to build something good to balance the scales. You're just trying to drag everyone else down into your misery. Save the philosophy for your Sunday school class. Harry, here's what's going to happen. Your son is going to pay me $50,000 by Friday. Think of it as a signing bonus for our new arrangement. After that, $30,000 a year, paid in 2 installments. Miss a payment, and every newspaper in the state gets a very interesting story about Vietnam War treason. Refuse to pay, and I start making phone calls to the families of Charlie Company. The line went dead, leaving us sitting in stunned silence in my kitchen. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was Eleanor's quiet crying and the ticking of the old clock on the wall that had marked time through 50 years of Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations and Christmas mornings. Finally, Marcus spoke. Dad, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you before. I looked at him, wondering what else could possibly make this situation worse. The $50,000 he's demanding. I don't have it. I can't get it. I've already borrowed against everything I own. My credit is maxed out. My retirement fund is gone, and the bank won't approve any more loans. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Bobby Kessler wasn't just trying to establish a new income stream. He was trying to destroy us completely. He knew Marcus couldn't pay $50,000. He was setting us up for failure, for public humiliation, for the complete destruction of everything our family had built. Then we're going to have to find another way, I said. What other way? Marcus asked desperately. Dad, he has us. He has everything. Our past, our present, our future. It's all in his hands. But I was thinking about Judge William Ashford, about 15 years of payments, about a man who might be ready to confess his sins before he died. And I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, there was another way to fight a man who'd turned our shame into his weapon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Eleanor, listening to her restless breathing, and knowing that she was as haunted by the day's revelations as I was. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of Charlie Company, young men barely out of their teens, their lives cut short by intelligence I'd sold for a handful of pills. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went down to my study. It's a small room off the living room where I keep my railroad memorabilia, old photo albums, and the few mementos I'd saved from Vietnam. I'd always told Eleanor and the kids that I didn't like to talk about the war because it brought back painful memories. Now they knew just how painful those memories really were. I pulled out a box I hadn't opened in 20 years. Inside were letters from army buddies, newspaper clippings from local veterans' events, and a worn address book with names and phone numbers of men I'd served with. Most of them were probably dead by now. We were all in our 80s, and time has a way of thinning the ranks. But there was one name I was looking for, one man who might have the information I needed. Tommy Rodriguez had been our company's communications specialist. If anyone would know about the intelligence leaks that had plagued our sector in 1968, it would be Tommy. He'd been the one monitoring radio traffic, tracking enemy communications, trying to figure out how Charlie Company and the others had walked into so many ambushes. I found his number in the book, updated in pencil multiple times over the years. The last entry was from 2019, a retirement home in Phoenix. I checked the clock, 5:30 in the morning. Too early to call, but I was too agitated to wait. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, wearing her old blue robe and carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought I might find you here, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Looking for answers? Looking for hope, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Eleanor, I need you to know something. I need you to understand why I never told you about Vietnam. She studied my face with those blue eyes that had seen me through 54 years of marriage. Tell me now. So I did. I told her about the nightmares that had driven me to the army medics, begging for anything that would help me sleep. I told her about the pills that hadn't been enough, about the desperation that had led me to seek stronger relief from Vietnamese black market dealers. I told her about Lieutenant Morrison approaching me with a proposition, intelligence for drugs, with Morrison taking a cut of the profits. I was weak, I said, my voice breaking. I was broken and desperate and so tired of carrying the weight of what I'd seen, what I'd done. When Morrison offered me a way to get the drugs I needed, I jumped at it. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about the soldiers who would die because of the information I was selling. Eleanor reached across the desk and took my hand. Harold, you were 23 years old and traumatized by war. What Morrison did, what he convinced you to do, that was manipulation. He was an officer. He was supposed to protect his men, not use them. That doesn't excuse what I did. No, she said quietly. It doesn't, but it explains it. And Harold, what you've done with your life since then, the man you became, the father you were to Marcus, the grandfather you are to Tyler and Emma, that matters too. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunrise through the study window. Finally, at 7 o'clock, I picked up the phone and dialed Tommy Rodriguez's number. A woman answered on the third ring. Desert Haven Retirement Community. I'd like to speak with Thomas Rodriguez, please. Tell him it's Harold Brennan calling. There was a pause, then the sound of the phone being transferred. A few minutes later, a familiar voice came on the line, though it was rougher and more fragile than I remembered. Harry Brennan? Well, I'll be damned. How many years has it been? Too many, Tommy. How are you holding up? Still breathing, which is more than I can say for most of the guys from our unit. What's got you calling after all these years? I took a deep breath. Tommy, I need to ask you about something from the war. About the intelligence leaks in our sector. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. When Tommy finally spoke, his voice was careful, guarded. That's ancient history, Harry. Why dig up old ghosts? Because the ghosts are digging themselves up, Tommy. I need to know what you knew back then about how the enemy was getting our operational intelligence. Another long pause. Harry, are you in some kind of trouble? The worst kind. Tommy, I need to know if you ever suspected anyone specific of leaking information to the enemy. Jesus, Harry. After all these years, why now? I told him about Bobby Kessler, about the blackmail, about Judge Ashford and the 15 years of payments. I didn't tell him about my own involvement. I wasn't ready for that confession yet. But I told him enough to make him understand that lives were at stake. Kessler, Tommy said when I finished. Bobby Kessler. Yeah, I remember him. Sergeant, right? Always had his ear to the ground. Always seemed to know things before the rest of us. What kind of things? Well, now that you mention it, he always seemed to know when we were walking into trouble, like he had advance warning. More than once, I saw him find excuses to avoid patrols that ended up getting hit hard. My blood went cold. What are you saying, Tommy? I'm saying that maybe Sergeant Kessler knew about those ambushes ahead of time. Maybe he was getting information from whoever was feeding intelligence to the enemy. The implications hit me like a freight train. Bobby Kessler hadn't just been a witness to my betrayal. He'd been a beneficiary of it. He'd used the intelligence I was selling to protect himself while letting other men walk into death traps. Tommy, this is important. Did you ever see Kessler talking to Lieutenant Morrison outside of normal military business? Morrison? Yeah, I remember Morrison. Strange guy. Always seemed nervous, always looking over his shoulder. And now that you mention it, yeah, I did see him and Kessler together a few times. Private conversations, usually after briefings. I figured it was just military business, but what? But there was something off about those conversations. The body language, you know. Like they were conspirators rather than officer and enlisted man. I felt the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves in my mind. Bobby Kessler hadn't just witnessed my dealings with the enemy, he'd been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. He'd been Morrison's inside man, the one who helped identify which soldiers would be vulnerable to recruitment, which operations would be most valuable to compromise. Tommy, did you ever report your suspicions? Who was I going to report them to? Morrison was our commanding officer, And Kessler was a sergeant with 15 years of service. I was just a specialist with a high school education. Besides, I wasn't sure. It was just a feeling, you know, a sense that something wasn't right. After I hung up with Tommy, I sat in my study for a long time, thinking about what I'd learned. Bobby Kessler wasn't just a blackmailer profiting from secrets he'd stumbled across. He was a co-conspirator who'd helped orchestrate the betrayals that had gotten 43 American soldiers killed. And now he was trying to destroy my family to protect his own role in those murders. Eleanor found me there an hour later, staring out the window at our rose garden. "What did you learn?" she asked. "I learned that Bobby Kessler is worse than I thought. And I learned that if we're going to stop him, we need to find Judge Ashford and convince him to help us." "How do we do that?" I turned to look at my wife. This remarkable woman who'd stood by me through everything, who'd saved my life with her love and faith. "We're going to do something I should have done 57 years ago," I said. "We're going to tell the truth." Eleanor nodded, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen since the day I'd asked her to marry me. Absolute trust, absolute faith that together we could face whatever came next. But first, I had to find the courage to face Judge William Ashford and tell him that I remembered Lieutenant Morrison, that I remembered our partnership, and that it was time for both of us to stop running from the consequences of what we'd done in Vietnam. The question was, would he be willing to help me stop Bobby Kessler, or would he choose to protect himself at the expense of my family? There was only one way to find out. Judge William Ashford lived in a stately Victorian house on Elm Street, just 6 blocks from our church. I'd driven past it hundreds of times over the years, never knowing that the man inside had shared my darkest secret. As Eleanor and I walked up the brick pathway to his front door, I felt like I was walking toward either salvation or damnation. It was Thursday morning. Bobby Kessler expected $50,000 by tomorrow, money that Marcus didn't have and couldn't get. This conversation with Ashford was our last hope. Eleanor squeezed my hand as I rang the doorbell. "Whatever happens, Harold, we face it together." The door opened to reveal a man I'd seen countless times, but was really seeing for the first time. Judge Ashford was 82, 2 years older than me, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that comes from a lifetime of commanding respect. But up close, I could see what I'd missed from 3 church pews away. The weight of guilt in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of more than just age. "Harold," he said, his voice carefully neutral. His voice. "Eleanor, this is unexpected." "Hello, Bill," I said, using his first name deliberately. "We need to talk. About Vietnam, about Lieutenant Morrison, about Bobby Kessler." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might collapse. His hand gripped the doorframe for support, and for a moment he just stared at us like we were ghosts from his past, come to claim him. I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, you do," I said gently. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, because you've been living with the same secret I have for 57 years. The only difference is that Bobby Kessler found you first." Ashford looked around nervously, as if he expected neighbors to be watching from their windows. "Come in," he said finally, quickly. His house was beautiful. Polished hardwood floors, antique furniture, walls lined with law books and commendations. The living room where he led us was dominated by a large portrait of him in his judge's robes, receiving some kind of civic honor. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Can I offer you coffee?" he asked, falling back on the social niceties that had probably helped him navigate difficult situations for decades. "Bill," I said, settling into a leather chair across from him, "we don't have time for pleasantries. Bobby Kessler is bleeding my family dry, and tomorrow he's going to demand money my son doesn't have. When Marcus can't pay, Kessler is going to destroy all of us." Ashford sank into his chair like a man twice his age. How did you figure it out?" Kessler told me, yesterday when he called to up his demands. He wanted me to know that I wasn't the only one he was bleeding. He wanted me to understand that this has been going on for years. 15 years, Ashford said quietly. 15 years of payments, 15 years of living in fear that someone would find out what I did in Vietnam. Eleanor leaned forward. Eleanor, what exactly did you do, Judge Ashford? He looked at her with the expression of a man who'd been waiting decades to confess his sins. I was Lieutenant Morrison back then, fresh out of officer training, 24 years old, and completely unprepared for what I found in Vietnam. The violence, the chaos, the way good men died for causes that seemed to change every week. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his manicured lawn. I started using drugs 6 months into my tour, just pills at first, to help me sleep, to calm my nerves before operations. But pills weren't enough, they never are. So you found other sources, I said. I found Vietnamese dealers who were willing to trade, but they didn't want money. They wanted information, troop movements, patrol schedules, operational plans. At first, I told myself I was only giving them minor details, things that couldn't really hurt anyone. But it escalated, Eleanor said. It always escalates. The dealers wanted more valuable intelligence, and I needed stronger drugs to cope with what I was becoming. That's when I realized I needed help. I needed someone with access to the kind of detailed operational information that would satisfy my suppliers. I felt the familiar weight of shame settling on my chest. So you recruited me. You were perfect, Ashford said, turning back to face us. Young, traumatized, already using pills from the medical corps. When I offered you a way to get stronger drugs, you jumped at the chance, and you had access to communications, to detailed patrol routes and timing. What about Kessler? I asked. What was his role in all this? Ashford's face darkened. Kessler was the go-between. He'd approach soldiers who seemed vulnerable, assess whether they might be willing to make deals. When he identified potential recruits, he'd report back to me. I'd make the initial contact, set up the arrangements. So he was your talent scout, Eleanor said, her voice heavy with disgust. He was more than that. Kessler had connections with Vietnamese dealers going back to his first tour. He'd been trading minor intelligence for drugs for months before I got involved. When I needed a way to expand the operation, he was the obvious choice for a partner. The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This hadn't been a desperate young officer and a traumatized enlisted man making terrible choices in isolation. This had been an organized operation, with Kessler as the facilitator and Morrison as the inside source for high-value intelligence. How many soldiers did you recruit? I asked. 7. Over the course of 6 months. You were the most valuable because of your communications access, but there were others. Supply clerks, motor pool mechanics, anyone with access to operationally useful information. And how many died because of what we did? Ashford closed his eyes. I stopped counting after 60. There may have been more. 60. 20 more than I'd known about. 20 more families destroyed by our greed and weakness. Judge Ashford, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the horrific revelations. What happened when the war ended? I came home, changed my name from Morrison to Ashford, my mother's maiden name, and tried to build a new life. I went to law school, became a prosecutor, eventually a judge. I thought I'd left it all behind. Until Kessler found you. He contacted me in 2010, said he'd been tracking down old unit members, piecing together what had happened in Vietnam. He had documents, photographs, even recordings of some of our meetings with Vietnamese contacts. He wanted money to keep quiet, and you paid. What choice did I have? I was a sitting judge with a reputation to protect. If word had gotten out about my role in the intelligence leaks, it wouldn't just have destroyed my career. It would have invalidated every case I'd ever tried, every sentence I'd ever handed down. I understood. Just as Bobby had understood when he'd targeted Marcus. The threat wasn't just to our personal reputations. It was to everything we'd built, everyone who depended on us. Bill, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you ready to stop paying Kessler? He looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. What do you mean? I mean, are you ready to face the consequences of what we did? Are you ready to tell the truth, even if it destroys everything we've built since Vietnam? Harold, Eleanor said quietly, what are you thinking? I stood up and walked to the window where Ashford had been standing. Outside, children were playing in a neighbor's yard, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze, innocent children who had no idea that two old men in this house were discussing secrets that had gotten soldiers killed half a century ago. I'm thinking that Bobby Kessler's power over us comes from our shame, I said. He can only destroy us if we're afraid of the truth coming out. But if we tell the truth ourselves, if we confess what we did and accept the consequences, then he has nothing to hold over us. You want to go public? Ashford asked, his voice barely a whisper. I want to take away his weapon. I want to protect my family from a man who's been profiting from murder for 57 years. Ashford was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Resolve. If we do this, he said, we'll lose everything. Our reputations, our legacies, our standing in the community. The families of the soldiers who died will hate us. The media will crucify us. Yes, I said simply, they will. But our families will be free. Yes, they will. Ashford nodded slowly. Then let's do it. Let's tell the truth. But as we began to plan our confession, none of us realized that Bobby Kessler was already one step ahead of us, and his next move would change everything we thought we knew about the game we were playing. We spent the rest of Thursday planning our confession. Judge Ashford had contacts at the major newspapers, and we decided to reach out to a journalist known for handling sensitive military stories with respect for veterans while still pursuing the truth. We would tell our story completely, hold nothing back, and accept whatever consequences came from our honesty. But when I got home that evening, I found Marcus pacing in my living room like a caged animal, his phone clutched in his white-knuckled fist. Dad, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. With Judge Ashford, I said. We have a plan. Marcus, we're going to... It's too late, Marcus interrupted, his voice hollow with despair. Dad, it's too late for plans. Eleanor appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. What's wrong? What's happened? Marcus held up his phone. Kessler called an hour ago. He said he's tired of waiting for his money. He said he's decided to accelerate the timeline. I felt ice forming in my stomach. What does that mean? It means he's not waiting until tomorrow for the 50,000. It means he's already started making his phone calls. The room started spinning around me. What phone calls? Marcus's voice cracked. He called the Washington Post, Dad. He called Channel 7 News. He called the Veterans Administration. And he called Tyler. Tyler? Eleanor gasped. He called our grandson? He told Tyler everything, Mum, about Grandpa's drug use in Vietnam, about the intelligence he sold, about the soldiers who died. Tyler is 25 years old, and some stranger just told him that his grandfather is responsible for the deaths of dozens of American soldiers. I collapsed into my chair, feeling every one of my 80 years. Oh, God. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I never wanted... There's more, Marcus said, and somehow his voice managed to get even bleaker. He didn't just call Tyler. He called Emma at college. He called Sarah at work. He called your old supervisor at the railroad, Dad. He called Pastor Williams at church. Each name was like another nail in my coffin. These were people who'd respected me, trusted me, looked up to me as an example of what a good man should be. And now they all knew that I was a fraud. The worst part, Marcus continued, is that he didn't just tell them what you did. He told them that I've been paying him to keep quiet. He made it sound like our whole family has been covering up war crimes for years. Eleanor sank into her chair beside me. Her face pale as parchment. Marcus, what did Tyler say when Kessler called him? He didn't believe it at first. He hung up on Kessler and called me immediately, but then... Marcus's voice broke completely. Then Kessler started sending him documents, photos, military records, even recordings of phone conversations between him and Judge Ashford discussing the payments. Recordings, I said. Bobby has been recording his conversations with Ashford. For 15 years, Dad, every phone call, every meeting, every payment negotiation, He has enough evidence to prosecute both of you for treason, even after all this time. The full scope of Bobby Kessler's trap was becoming clear. He hadn't just been blackmailing us, he'd been building a case against us. Documenting everything, gathering evidence, preparing for the day when he could destroy us completely. "There's something else," Marcus said. "Something that changes everything." I looked up at my son, wondering what else could possibly make this situation worse. When Kessler called Tyler, he told him something that he hadn't told us. He said that Judge Ashford isn't the only other person he's been blackmailing. My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" He said there were 7 soldiers involved in the intelligence trading operation. 7. And over the past 20 years, he's tracked down all of them. He's been blackmailing 6 families. Dad, 6 families paying him to keep quiet about what their fathers and grandfathers did in Vietnam. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Bobby Kessler hadn't just been targeting Ashford and me. He'd been running a systematic extortion operation, bleeding 6 families dry for decades. "Who?" I whispered. "Who are the others?" Marcus consulted his phone. "The names Tyler gave me. Robert Chen, the pharmacist on Main Street. His father was apparently involved. David Martinez, who runs the auto repair shop. His grandfather was one of the 7. Sarah's old high school principal, Mr. Thompson, his uncle. Even our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Her late husband was involved. I thought about our neighbor, sweet old Mrs. Patterson, who brought us cookies every Christmas and always asked about the grandchildren. Her husband had died 5 years ago, but I remembered him as a quiet man who rarely talked about his military service. Now I understood why. "Dad," Marcus said, "do you understand what this means? Kessler has been destroying families for decades, and now he's decided to go public with all of it. Not just our story, but all 7 families." Eleanor found her voice. "Why now? Why would he expose everyone at once?" I thought about my conversation with Bobby, about the cruel satisfaction in his voice when he'd described his business arrangements with his victims. "Because he's dying," I said quietly. "He mentioned cancer, medical bills. He's dying, and he wants to take all of us down with him." The room fell silent as we absorbed the implications. This wasn't just about our family anymore. This was about 6 other families who'd been living with the same shame, the same fear, the same crushing weight of inherited guilt. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went white. "It's Tyler," he said, answering immediately. "Tyler, are you—" But it wasn't Tyler's voice that came through the phone. It was Bobby Kessler's. "Well, well, Harry," Bobby said, his voice crackling through the speaker. "I hope you're enjoying the family reunion. Your grandson has such a lovely phone. Very trusting young man. Gave me his password when I told him I was from tech support helping with a security issue." "You son of a bitch," I snarled. "Where's Tyler?" "Oh, he's fine. We're just having a little chat about family history. Turns out he's very interested in learning about his grandfather's war record. Very interested indeed." Eleanor grabbed my arm. "Bobby, please, he's just a boy. He doesn't have anything to do with this." "Doesn't he?" "Though, see, here's the thing about family legacies, Eleanor. They don't just affect the people who create them. They ripple down through generations, touching everyone who carries the family name." "What do you want?" Marcus demanded. "What I've always wanted, justice, accountability, an end to the comfortable lies that have let these families prosper while the families of the soldiers they killed have suffered. This isn't justice," I said. "This is revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing, Harry. Your grandson is quite the idealist, by the way, very upset to learn that his hero grandfather is actually a traitor who sold out his country for drugs. But he's young. He'll get over it. Or maybe he won't. Either way, the truth is finally coming out." The line went dead, leaving us staring at the phone in horror. "We have to call the police," Eleanor said. "And tell them what?" Marcus replied. "That a man who knows our family's deepest secrets has Tyler's phone. They'll ask questions we can't answer without exposing everything." I stood up slowly, my mind racing. Bobby Kessler had just made his biggest mistake. He'd involved my grandson directly, personally. He'd crossed the line from blackmail to potential kidnapping. "No," I said. "We're not calling the police. We're going to end this ourselves." "How?" Marcus asked. I thought about the other 6 families, about decades of payments, about the systematic destruction of lives that Bobby Kessler had been orchestrating. "We're going to do what we should have done 20 years ago," I said. "We're going to stop running from the truth. But first, I had to make sure my grandson was safe, and to do that, I was going to have to face Bobby Kessler one last time. Not as a victim, but as the man I should have been 57 years ago, the man who was finally ready to fight back. I called Tyler's number every 10 minutes for the next 2 hours. Each time it went straight to voicemail, and each time I heard my grandson's recorded voice asking me to leave a message, my heart broke a little more. Bobby Kessler had my boy, and I knew that every minute that passed was another minute Tyler spent learning things about his grandfather that would change how he saw me forever. At 9 o'clock that night, Tyler's phone finally rang back. I answered before the first ring finished. "Tyler? Tyler, are you all right?" "Hello, Harry." Bobby Kessler's voice was weary but triumphant. "Your grandson is fine. We've had quite an educational evening together. If you've hurt him, I haven't laid a finger on him. Didn't need to. Turns out Tyler is a very reasonable young man. Very interested in historical truth, very disappointed in family members who've been living lies." In the background, I could hear Tyler's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. He sounded upset, angry, but not physically harmed. "Where are you?" I demanded. "We're at the Old Veterans Memorial in Riverside Park. You know the one, where they honor the local boys who died in Vietnam. Seems appropriate, don't you think?" Tyler's been reading the names on the wall, learning about the soldiers from his hometown who never made it back. He's particularly interested in the 3 names from Charlie Company. My chest tightened. Charlie Company, the unit that had been wiped out because of intelligence I'd provided. 3 boys from our town had died in that ambush. Boys I'd gone to high school with, boys whose mothers had asked me about their sons when I came home. "Bobby, let Tyler go. This is between us. It always has been." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Harry. This was never just between us. This is about legacy, about truth, about the price of keeping secrets. Your grandson deserves to know who his grandfather really is." Eleanor grabbed the phone from my hand. "Mr. Kessler, this is Eleanor Brennan. Whatever you think you're accomplishing by involving our grandson, you're wrong. Tyler is innocent in all this." "Innocent?" Bobby's laugh was bitter. "Lady, do you think the grandchildren of the soldiers your husband killed got to stay innocent? Do you think they didn't have to live with the truth about how their grandfathers died? That's different, and you know it." Eleanor shot back with more fire than I'd heard from her in years. "Those soldiers were heroes who died serving their country. Harold made terrible mistakes, but he's spent 57 years trying to atone for them." "Atone?" Bobby's voice rose. "He spent 57 years hiding, building a reputation, playing the role of the respectable veteran, letting everyone think he was a hero when he was really a traitor." I took the phone back. "Bobby, I'll give you whatever you want. All the money Marcus has left, my railroad pension, the house, everything. Just let Tyler come home." "I don't want your money anymore, Harry. I want something much more valuable." "What?" "I want you to come down here and tell your grandson the truth, all of it. I want you to look that idealistic young man in the eye and explain how his grandfather sold out American soldiers for drugs. I want you to watch his respect for you die, just like those soldiers died. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Bobby wasn't just trying to destroy my reputation or my family's financial security. He was trying to destroy the relationship between me and my grandson. He wanted to watch Tyler lose faith in me, wanted to see the pain in my eyes when the boy I loved realized what I really was. And if I do that, if I come down there and confess everything to Tyler, you'll leave my family alone. I'll consider our business concluded," Bobby said. "The truth will be out, and justice will be served." I looked at Eleanor and Marcus, both of them staring at me with a mixture of fear and determination. In their eyes, I saw 57 years of love and trust. Love and trust that would be shattered when Tyler learned the truth about what I'd done in Vietnam. But I also saw something else, the strength of a family that had weathered every storm together, that had built something beautiful despite the shadows of the past. "All right," I said, "I'll come. But Bobby, I want you to understand something. When this is over, when you've had your revenge, you're not going to feel the peace you think you will. Destroying other people's happiness doesn't heal your own pain. We'll see about that, Harry. Riverside Park, 15 minutes. And Harry, come alone. If I see anyone else, if I even suspect you've called the police, I disappear with your grandson, and this conversation never happened." The line went dead. Eleanor gripped my arm. "Harold, you can't go alone. It's too dangerous." "I have to. He has Tyler. Then we'll follow at a distance," Marcus said. "We'll stay out of sight, but we'll be there if you need us." I nodded, grateful for their support even as I dreaded what was coming. In 15 minutes, I would have to look my grandson in the eye and destroy his image of me forever. I would have to watch the boy, who'd always looked up to me, learn that his grandfather was not a hero, but a man whose weakness had cost dozens of soldiers their lives. But as I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I realized something else. For the first time in 57 years, I was going to stop running from the truth. I was going to face my grandson, face my past, and face the consequences of what I'd done. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to finally set us all free. The drive to Riverside Park took 7 minutes. As I pulled into the parking lot, I could see 2 figures standing near the memorial wall, one tall and elderly, one young and slumped with what looked like despair. Bobby Kessler and my grandson Tyler, silhouetted against the spotlights that illuminated the names of the dead. I got out of my car and walked toward them, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. But for the first time in decades, I wasn't walking away from the truth. I was walking toward it, finally ready to face whatever came next. Tyler looked up as I approached the memorial wall, and the expression on his face nearly brought me to my knees. My grandson, the boy who used to climb into my lap to hear stories about the old days, who'd always looked at me with such admiration and love, was staring at me like I was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, like I was the enemy. "Grandpa," he said, his voice hollow and distant, "is it true? What Mr. Kessler told me, is it really true?" Bobby stood beside him, leaning heavily on a walking cane I'd never seen him use before. Up close, I could see how much the cancer had ravaged him. He was thin, almost skeletal, with the grey pallor of a man who didn't have much time left. But his eyes still burned with the same bitter hatred I'd heard in his voice. "Go ahead, Harry," Bobby said. "Tell the boy about his grandfather's war record." I looked at Tyler, 25 years old, fresh out of college. Still young enough to believe that the world was divided into clear categories of good and evil. In 10 minutes, I was going to shatter that innocence forever. "Tyler," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what exactly did Mr. Kessler tell you?" "He said," Tyler's voice cracked, "he said you sold military secrets to the enemy in Vietnam. He said American soldiers died because of information you gave to the North Vietnamese. He said you're not a war hero at all, but a traitor." The word hit me like a physical blow. Traitor. It was the word I'd been running from for 57 years, the label that defined what I'd become in those dark months of 1968. "Tyler," I said, stepping closer, "I need you to understand something. What Mr. Kessler told you, it's true, but it's not the whole truth." Bobby laughed harshly. "Here we go. The excuses, the justifications, the attempt to make himself look like a victim instead of a perpetrator. No," I said firmly, looking directly at my grandson. "No excuses. Tyler, I did sell military intelligence to enemy agents in Vietnam. I did it in exchange for drugs, heroin, opium, anything that would stop the nightmares and the shaking and the constant fear. And yes, American soldiers died because of what I did." Tyler's face crumpled, and I saw the exact moment when his childhood hero died in his eyes. "Grandpa, how could you? How could you betray your own country, your own brothers? Because I was broken, I said simply. I was 23 years old, and I'd seen things that no human being should ever see. I'd watched my best friends die in ways that still haunt my dreams. I was using pills from the army medics, but they weren't enough. The pain was too much, the memories too vivid. When someone offered me a way to make it stop, I took it. But other soldiers lived through the same things, Tyler said, his voice rising with anger and confusion. Other people came back from Vietnam without becoming traitors. You're right, I said. They did. They were stronger than me, or luckier, or they had better support systems. I don't know why I broke when others didn't. All I know is that I made the worst decision of my life, and I've been trying to atone for it ever since. Bobby stepped forward, his cane clicking on the concrete. Atone? You call building a comfortable life on a foundation of lies atonement? You call letting people honor you as a veteran while hiding what you really did atonement? I call raising a good son atonement, I shot back. I call being a faithful husband for 54 years atonement. I call working honestly for 40 years and contributing to my community atonement. I call being the best grandfather I could be atonement. Built on lies, Bobby snarled. All of it built on lies. Yes, I said, turning back to Tyler. Yes, it was built on lies, because I was too much of a coward to face the truth, because I was afraid that if people knew what I'd really done, they'd never be able to see me as anything else. Tyler was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. Did you ever think about the families, Grandpa? The families of the soldiers who died because of you? The question cut deeper than any of Bobby's accusations because it came from someone I loved. Someone whose opinion mattered more to me than my own life. Every day, I said, Tyler, not a single day has passed in 57 years that I haven't thought about those soldiers. I know their names, I know their ages, I know which ones had children, which ones were getting married when they came home, which ones were going to college on the GI Bill. I gestured to the memorial wall behind us. 3 of them are on this wall. Jimmy Patterson, Danny Rodriguez, Mike Sullivan. I went to high school with Jimmy. Danny's sister was in my Sunday school class. Mike's mother asked me about him when I came home. Wanted to know if he'd suffered, if he'd been brave at the end. What did you tell her? Tyler asked. I told her he was brave. I told her he died a hero. And Tyler, that part wasn't a lie. Those boys were heroes, even if the man who got them killed wasn't. Bobby stepped between us, his eyes blazing with fury. Don't you dare try to make yourself sound noble, Harry. Don't you dare pretend that your guilt makes you a victim. I'm not a victim, I said, facing him directly for the first time since this nightmare began. I'm a man who made terrible choices and has been trying to live with the consequences ever since. But Bobby, you're not a victim either. You're a profiteer. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to Tyler. Did Mr. Kessler tell you that he was involved in the intelligence trading operation? Did he mention that he was Lieutenant Morrison's partner, that he helped recruit soldiers like me to sell information to the enemy? Tyler's eyes widened. What? Bobby's face went white with rage. That's a lie. Is it? I said. Tyler, ask him about his role in the operation. Ask him how many families he's been blackmailing for decades. Ask him why he's really doing this. Tyler, don't listen to him, Bobby said desperately. He's trying to deflect blame, trying to make me the villain so he doesn't have to face what he really is. But Tyler was looking at Bobby with new eyes, the same analytical intelligence that had gotten him through college, now focused on the man who'd spent the evening filling his head with revelations about his grandfather. Mr. Kessler, Tyler said slowly, how did you know so much about what my grandfather did? How did you have so many details about military operations from 57 years ago? Bobby opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain, caught off guard. I was there, he said finally. I saw things, heard things. You were more than just a witness, I said. Tell him, Bobby. Tell my grandson about your partnership with Lieutenant Morrison. Tell him about the other 6 families you've been bleeding dry for decades. Tell him about the real reason you're doing this. The moment stretched between us like a taut wire. Bobby Kessler, The man who'd held the power of life and death over my family for months suddenly looked like what he really was, a dying old man whose last act was going to be the destruction of innocent people. "Tyler," I said gently, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget what I did or pretend it doesn't matter. But I am asking you to understand that this man isn't seeking justice. He's seeking revenge for his own guilt, his own role in what happened." Tyler looked back and forth between us, trying to process everything he'd learned in one devastating evening. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but filled with a pain that broke my heart. "Grandpa, I need time to think about all this. I need to understand how the man who taught me about honor and integrity could have done what you did. But right now, I just want to go home." I nodded, knowing that this was probably the last conversation my grandson and I would ever have. "Of course. Bobby, you've had your pound of flesh. Let the boy go." But Bobby Kessler wasn't done with us yet. As Tyler started to walk toward my car, Bobby called out one final revelation that would change everything we thought we understood about the game we'd been playing. "Tyler," he shouted, "there's one more thing your grandfather hasn't told you. One more secret he's been keeping." I froze, my blood turning to ice, because there was no more secret. I'd confessed everything, hadn't I? Tyler stopped walking and turned back, his face etched with exhaustion and pain. "What now? What else could there possibly be?" Bobby Kessler smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "Tell him, Harry. Tell your grandson about Charlie Company's medic. Tell him about the morphine." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My legs went weak, and I had to grab onto the memorial wall for support. Beside me, I could hear Eleanor's name carved in stone, Elena Rodriguez, Danny's sister who died in a car accident 10 years ago, never knowing the truth about her brother's death. "Grandpa?" Tyler's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is he talking about?" I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because Bobby Kessler had just revealed the one secret I'd never told anyone. Not Eleanor, not Marcus, not even Judge Ashford. The secret that was so dark, so shameful, that I'd buried it so deep I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. "The morphine, Harry," Bobby continued, his voice soft and deadly. "Tell him about Doc Martinez. Tell him about what you did to get those medical supplies." Tyler stepped closer, his face pale in the memorial's spotlights. "Grandpa, what morphine? What medical supplies?" I looked at my grandson, this young man who'd already learned too much tonight, who'd already had his faith in me shattered beyond repair. How could I tell him about this? How could I reveal the one act that was even worse than selling intelligence to the enemy? "Charlie Company's medic was named Jesus Martinez," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Doc, we called him. 22 years old, from El Paso, Texas. He'd been my friend since basic training." "What about him?" Tyler asked. "He was wounded in the ambush that happened because of intelligence I'd sold. A bullet to the stomach, internal bleeding. He needed morphine for the pain, needed medical supplies to stop the hemorrhaging." Bobby stepped closer, sensing my agony like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Go on, Harry. Tell him what you did when Doc needed those supplies." I closed my eyes, seeing Doc Martinez's face as clearly as if he was standing in front of me. Dark hair, kind eyes, always ready with a joke or a story from home. The man who'd patched up dozens of soldiers, who'd saved lives under fire, who'd trusted me as his friend. The Vietnamese contact who bought intelligence from me, I continued. He also had access to medical supplies, morphine, bandages, antibiotics, things that were sometimes hard to get through regular military channels. "And," Tyler prompted, though I could see in his eyes that he was beginning to understand. "And Doc was dying. The army medics were overwhelmed, the supply lines were cut, and he needed morphine immediately, or he was going to die in agony." I opened my eyes and looked at my grandson, knowing that what I was about to say would destroy whatever small chance I had of redemption in his eyes. "So I made a deal," I said. "I traded more intelligence, detailed information about our medical facilities, our casualty evacuation procedures, our field hospital locations, in exchange for enough morphine to ease Doc's pain. Tyler's face went white. You sold information about medical facilities to the enemy? Yes. Information that could have been used to target hospitals, to attack medical personnel? Yes. Bobby Kessler's laugh was like broken glass. Tell him the rest, Harry. Tell him what happened to those medical facilities. I wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the darkness and never face another human being again. But Tyler was my grandson, and he deserved the truth, no matter how horrific it was. 3 days later, I said, the field hospital at Landing Zone Delta was attacked. Mortars, small arms fire, coordinated assault. 12 medical personnel were killed, including nurses and doctors. 47 wounded soldiers died because they couldn't be evacuated in time. The numbers fell into the silence like stones into a grave. 12 medical personnel, 47 wounded soldiers. 59 more deaths that could be laid at my feet. But Doc Martinez lived, Tyler said, his voice hollow, for 2 more days. The morphine helped with his pain, but it couldn't stop the internal bleeding. He died holding my hand, thanking me for being such a good friend. I could see Doc's face in my mind, pale and peaceful in death, his lips moving in a final prayer for his family back home. He died believing that I'd done everything I could to save him. He'd never known that I'd traded the lives of 60 medical personnel and wounded soldiers for the morphine that had eased his last hours. So you see, Tyler, Bobby said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Your grandfather didn't just sell out combat soldiers. He sold out doctors and nurses and wounded men who couldn't defend themselves. He traded the lives of healers for drugs. Tyler stared at me for a long moment, his young face aging before my eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was that of a stranger. How many, Grandpa? How many people died because of what you did? I did the math I'd been avoiding for 57 years. Charlie Company, 12 dead. The other patrols and operations compromised by intelligence I'd sold, 43 dead. The medical facilities attack, 59 dead. 114 confirmed deaths, I said. Probably more. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 114 families destroyed, 114 futures cut short, 114 names that would never be spoken again, except in grief and remembrance. Tyler took a step back from me, then another. I can't even look at you right now. Tyler, please, no. The word exploded from him with such force that both Bobby and I jumped. Don't say my name. Don't talk to me. I need to think. I need to get away from here. He turned and started walking toward the parking lot, his shoulders shaking with sobs. I started to follow him, but Bobby's cane blocked my path. Let him go, Harry. Let him walk away from you the same way you walked away from your responsibility 57 years ago. Bobby, I said, turning to face him with every ounce of rage and despair I'd been holding back. You've won. You've destroyed my family, destroyed my relationship with my grandson, destroyed everything I've built since Vietnam. Are you satisfied? Not yet, he said. There's one more thing. I stared at him, wondering what else he could possibly do to hurt me. I'd lost Tyler's respect, probably forever. Eleanor and Marcus would learn about the medical facilities attack when the story went public. My reputation would be destroyed not just locally, but nationally. What more could Bobby Kessler take from me? The other families, he said. The 6 other families I've been bleeding for decades. They don't know about the medical facilities attack, Harry. They think their fathers and grandfathers were just small-time intelligence traders. They don't know that their patriarchs sold out doctors and nurses. I felt the trap closing around me. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow morning I'm going to call them all 6 families, and I'm going to tell them that Harold Brennan was the one who provided the intelligence for the medical facilities attack. I'm going to tell them that their loved ones died because you needed morphine for your friend. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Bobby wasn't just planning to destroy my family. He was planning to turn the other 6 families against us, to make us pariahs even among the other victims of his blackmail scheme. They'll hate us, I said. Those families will see us as the worst of the worst. As they should, Bobby said. Because, Harry, that's exactly what you are. He started walking toward the parking lot, leaving me alone by the memorial wall with the names of the dead. As I watched him go, I realized that this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the final phase of Bobby Kessler's revenge. And tomorrow, when he made those phone calls, my family wouldn't just be facing public disgrace. We'd be facing the hatred and condemnation of the only people who might have understood our shame. We would be completely, utterly alone. I drove home in complete silence, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. Tyler had taken a cab from the park rather than ride with me, and I didn't blame him. If I were in his position, I wouldn't want to be in the same car with Harold Brennan either. When I walked into my house, Eleanor and Marcus were waiting in the living room, their faces tight with worry and fear. They took one look at me and knew that everything had gone wrong. "Dad," Marcus said, "where's Tyler?" "He went home," I said, collapsing into my chair, "and he may never speak to me again." I told them everything, about the medical facilities attack, about the 114 confirmed deaths, about Doc Martinez and the morphine that had cost 60 lives. With each revelation, I watched Eleanor's face grow more distant, more shocked, until she was looking at me like I was a complete stranger. "Harold," she whispered when I finished, 114 people? Medical personnel? Wounded soldiers? Yes, and you never told me. In 54 years of marriage, you never thought I had a right to know that my husband was responsible for the deaths of doctors and nurses? I couldn't meet her eyes. I was afraid you'd leave me. "I should have left you," she said, her voice cracking. "I should have left you 54 years ago when I still had a chance to build a different life." The words cut deeper than anything Bobby Kessler had said to me, because they came from Eleanor, my Eleanor, who'd saved me, who'd loved me despite everything, who'd stood by me through every crisis we'd faced together. "Mom," Marcus said gently, "don't say things you don't mean." "I mean every word," Eleanor replied, standing up from her chair. "Marcus, your father isn't the man I thought I married. He's not the man who raised you. He's a stranger who's been lying to us for our entire lives together." She walked to the window and stared out at the rose garden we'd planted together 20 years ago. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even the deaths, though God knows those are horrific enough. It's the fact that he let me love a lie. He let me build my entire life around a man who didn't exist." "Eleanor," I said, standing up and moving toward her. "Please, I'm still the same man who—" "Don't touch me," she said without turning around. "Don't you dare touch me right now." Marcus stepped between us. "Dad, maybe you should give her some space." But before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. "Hello," I answered. "Harold Brennan?" The voice was elderly, female, shaking with emotion. "Yes, this is Margaret Patterson, your next-door neighbor. I think we need to talk." Mrs. Patterson, the sweet old lady who brought us cookies every Christmas, whose husband had been one of the 7 soldiers involved in the intelligence trading operation. "Mrs. Patterson, it's late. Maybe we could—" "No," she said firmly. "It can't wait. I just got a phone call from a man named Robert Kessler. He told me some very interesting things about you and my late husband. Things I think you and I need to discuss face to face." My blood went cold. Bobby had already started making his calls, already started turning the other families against us. "I'll be right over," I said. "No, I'm coming to you. I want your wife to hear this too. I want your whole family to understand what kind of man they've been living with." She hung up before I could respond. Through the window I could see lights coming on in her house next door. A few minutes later, there was a knock at our front door. Mrs. Patterson stood on our porch in her bathrobe and slippers, her white hair uncombed, her eyes red with tears and fury. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, middle-aged, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "This is my nephew, Detective Paul Patterson," she said as they entered our living room. "He drove down from the city when I called him. He wanted to hear this story for himself." A detective. Mrs. Patterson had brought a police detective to our house. This was about to get much worse. "Mrs. Patterson," Eleanor said, moving to greet our neighbor. "What's this about?" "It's about my husband, Eleanor. It's about what he did in Vietnam and what your husband did to cover it up." Detective Patterson stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, I understand you have some information about military intelligence operations during the Vietnam War. Operations that may have resulted in the deaths of American personnel." I looked at Marcus, then at Eleanor, then back at Mrs. Patterson. Sweet old Mrs. Patterson, who'd been our neighbor for 15 years, who'd never shown anything but kindness to our family. "What did Bobby Kessler tell you?" I asked. "He told me that my husband sold military intelligence to enemy agents," she said, her voice shaking. "He told me that Robert, my Robert, who I was married to for 47 years, was a traitor who got American soldiers killed." "Mrs. Patterson!" "But he also told me something else," she continued. "He told me that you were the one who provided the intelligence that led to the attack on the medical facilities. He told me that you're the reason 60 doctors and nurses and wounded soldiers died." Detective Patterson was taking notes now, his pen moving quickly across a small notebook. "Mr. Brennan, do you confirm that you were involved in trading military intelligence to enemy agents during the Vietnam War?" The room fell silent. Eleanor and Marcus were staring at me, waiting to see if I would finally tell the complete truth to a law enforcement officer. Mrs. Patterson was watching, with tears streaming down her face, waiting to learn if her late husband had really been a traitor. And Detective Patterson was waiting to determine if he was looking at a man who'd committed treason against the United States of America. "Yes," I said quietly, "I was involved in trading military intelligence to enemy agents." "And did this intelligence lead to attacks on American military personnel?" "Yes." "Including medical facilities?" I closed my eyes, seeing Doc Martinez's face one more time. "Yes." Detective Patterson closed his notebook. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station. There are some people who want to talk to you about these operations." "What people?" Marcus asked. "Federal agents," Detective Patterson replied. "Apparently, Mr. Kessler didn't just call families tonight. He also called the FBI. The room started spinning around me. The FBI. Bobby Kessler hadn't just destroyed my family and turned the other victims against us. He'd also reported us to federal law enforcement. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, "what happens now?" Detective Patterson looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Now we find out if the statute of limitations has expired on treason charges, and if it hasn't." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood what he was saying. At 80 years old, I might be going to prison for the rest of my life. And my family, my beautiful family that I'd worked so hard to protect, would have to live with the knowledge that their father and grandfather was not just a traitor, but a man whose crimes had finally caught up with him after 57 years of running. Eleanor turned away from the window and looked at me one last time. "Harold," she said, her voice empty of all emotion, "I want you to leave, tonight. I don't care where you go, but I can't have you in this house anymore." "Eleanor, please, just go," she said. "Go with the detective, go to jail, go anywhere, but don't come back here. I can't look at you anymore." And as Detective Patterson placed his hand on my arm and guided me toward the door, I realized that Bobby Kessler had achieved something even more devastating than he'd planned. He hadn't just destroyed Harold Brennan. He'd destroyed the last 57 years of my life, leaving me with nothing but the truth I'd been running from since 1968. The FBI field office in downtown Springfield was a sterile, fluorescent-lit building that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat in an interrogation room for 6 hours, answering the same questions over and over while federal agents took notes and exchanged meaningful glances. Agent Sarah Chen was the lead investigator, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but an uncompromising voice. She'd been patient with me, almost gentle, as I confessed to crimes that had haunted my sleep for 57 years. "Mr. Brennan," she said, as dawn light began filtering through the small window, "I want you to understand something. The statute of limitations for most of your actions expired decades ago. From a federal prosecution standpoint, you're not likely to face criminal charges. I looked up from my hands, surprised. What do you mean? I mean that while what you did was undeniably treasonous, the government's ability to prosecute you for those specific crimes has passed. However, there was always a however. However, Agent Chen continued, your testimony is extremely valuable for our ongoing investigation into war crimes and intelligence breaches during the Vietnam War. We'd like you to cooperate fully with our investigation, including providing detailed information about all participants in the operation, including Judge Ashford, and including Robert Kessler. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. What happens to them? That depends on what we find and what the statute of limitations allows. But Mr. Brennan, there's something else you should know. Something that changes the entire context of this case. Agent Chen opened a thick file folder and pulled out several photographs. Black and white surveillance photos that looked like they'd been taken decades ago. We've been investigating Robert Kessler for 23 years, she said. My blood went cold. What? Robert Kessler first came to our attention in 2002 when one of his blackmail victims, a veteran named Thomas Chen, my father, attempted suicide rather than continue paying extortion money. The words hit me like a physical blow. Agent Chen's father, one of the 7 soldiers involved in the intelligence trading operation. Your father was one of the soldiers recruited by Lieutenant Morrison and Sergeant Kessler. Yes, a supply clerk who provided information about ammunition shipments and supply routes. He came home from Vietnam, built a decent life, raised a family, and then in 2002, Robert Kessler contacted him and threatened to destroy everything he'd worked for. Agent Chen's voice remained professional, but I could see the pain in her eyes. My father paid Kessler for 6 months, $15,000 every payment, just like the others. But the guilt was eating him alive. The shame of what he'd done in Vietnam, combined with the humiliation of being blackmailed, drove him to despair. What happened? He tried to hang himself in our garage. My mother found him just in time. She paused, collecting herself. After that, my father came to the FBI. He confessed everything. His role in the intelligence trading operation, Kessler's blackmail scheme, the other families being victimized. I stared at the photographs on the table. So you've known about all of this for 23 years? We've been building a case against Kessler for 23 years. The problem was that his victims were too terrified to testify against him. They were more afraid of their secrets being exposed than they were of continued extortion. So why didn't you arrest him? Because extortion and blackmail are serious crimes, but they're not treason. And because we needed more evidence, more witnesses, more testimony about the original intelligence operation. We needed someone like you, Mr. Brennan. Agent Chen leaned forward. Your confession last night, combined with the evidence we've gathered over 2 decades, gives us everything we need to prosecute Robert Kessler for a conspiracy that's been ongoing for over 50 years. The irony was staggering. Bobby Kessler's final act of revenge, reporting me to the FBI, had given federal agents the last piece of evidence they needed to destroy him. What about the other families? I asked. The people he's been blackmailing? They'll be free, finally free. Mr. Brennan, you have no idea what a relief this is going to be for families who've been living in fear for decades. But I was thinking about my own family. About Eleanor's face when she'd told me to leave, about Tyler's horror when he'd learned the truth about his grandfather, about Marcus, caught in the middle of a nightmare he'd never asked to be part of. Agent Chen, I said quietly, what about my family? My wife, my son, my grandson. They're innocent in all this. I know they are. And Mr. Brennan, I hope you'll consider letting us help you tell your story publicly, not as a criminal, but as a victim of a decades-long extortion scheme, as a man who made terrible mistakes as a young soldier and has been paying for them ever since. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's tears, about the hatred in her eyes when she'd learned about her husband's involvement. The other families, will they understand? Will they be able to forgive? Some will, some won't. But Mr. Brennan, there's something else you should know about those families, something that might surprise you. She pulled out another photograph, a group shot that looked like it had been taken at some kind of gathering. I recognized several faces: Mrs. Patterson's late husband, Judge Ashford, when he was younger, and several other elderly men I'd seen around town over the years. This photograph was taken in 1995 at a Vietnam veterans reunion here in Springfield. All 7 men attended. They'd been meeting annually for 25 years. I stared at the photograph, trying to process what she was telling me. They knew each other after the war. They not only knew each other, Mr. Brennan, they supported each other. They'd formed an informal support group, meeting once a year to discuss their guilt, their shame, their struggles with PTSD and addiction. They called themselves the Ghosts of Charlie Company. The name hit me like a punch to the stomach. Charlie Company, the unit that had been wiped out because of intelligence I'd provided. These men had named their support group after the soldiers they'd helped kill. Why didn't they contact me? I asked. Because they couldn't find you. Harold Brennan had disappeared from military records after 1969. They assumed you were dead, or that you'd changed your identity. They spent years looking for you, wanting to include you in their group, wanting to help you deal with the guilt they knew you must be carrying. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. For 57 years, I'd thought I was alone with my shame. I'd thought I was the only one carrying the weight of what we'd done. But these men, these 6 other broken veterans, had been looking for me, wanting to help me heal. Mr. Brennan, Agent Chen said gently, they want to meet with you, all of them. They want to finally complete their circle, to include the 7th ghost in their brotherhood. Even after what I did, even knowing about the medical facilities, especially knowing about the medical facilities, because they understand, Mr. Brennan. They understand what it's like to carry that kind of guilt for 57 years. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than despair. Hope, the possibility that redemption might be more than just a word in Sunday sermons. What about my family? I asked again. Agent Chen smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Mr. Brennan, why don't we call them and find out? She handed me a phone, and I stared at it for a long moment before dialing my home number. The phone rang 3 times before Eleanor answered. Hello? Her voice was tired, defeated. Eleanor, it's me. Harold, where are you? Are you in jail? I'm at the FBI office. Eleanor, there are some things I need to tell you. Things about Bobby Kessler, about the other families, about what's really been happening. I don't want to hear any more confessions. Harold, I can't take any more revelations. This isn't a confession, honey. This might be hope. There was a long pause, then, what kind of hope? And for the first time in days, I found myself smiling as I prepared to tell my wife that sometimes even the darkest secrets can lead to light. 3 months later, I stood in the same park where Bobby Kessler had tried to destroy my family, but this time I wasn't alone. 6 other elderly men stood with me, the surviving members of the Ghosts of Charlie Company. We'd come here to honor the dead, all of them, the soldiers who died because of our actions, and Robert Kessler, who died of cancer 2 weeks after the FBI arrested him. Tyler stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. It had taken weeks of difficult conversations, but my grandson had slowly begun to understand the difference between the choices a broken young man had made in war and the man his grandfather had worked to become since then. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "are you ready?" I looked at the memorial wall, at the names carved in stone. Jimmy Patterson, Danny Rodriguez, Mike Sullivan, 3 boys from our town who'd never made it home. But today, their names would be joined by others. A new memorial plaque that would honor all 114 soldiers who died because of our intelligence operation. "I'm ready," I said. Eleanor stepped forward and took my hand. The past 3 months had been the hardest of our marriage, filled with tears and anger and painful honesty. But we'd made it through, together. She'd stood by me during the media storm that followed Kessler's arrest, during the congressional hearings where I'd testified about wartime intelligence operations, during the dark nights when I'd woken up screaming with nightmares about Doc Martinez. "The families are here," she said, nodding toward a group of people gathered near the memorial. I saw them, sons and daughters, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the soldiers who died because of what we'd done. Some watched us with anger, others with curiosity, a few with something that might have been forgiveness. They'd come because Agent Chen had arranged this ceremony, because she'd convinced them that healing sometimes requires facing painful truths together. Marcus approached with Sarah and Emma, my granddaughter. Emma had taken the revelations about her grandfather better than anyone expected, with the resilience of youth and the wisdom that comes from growing up in a more complicated world than the one I'd known. "Dad," Marcus said, "the FBI agents are ready when you are." Agent Chen stood near a podium that had been set up for the ceremony. Beside her was Agent Williams, who'd been investigating war crimes for 30 years. They'd helped arrange this memorial service not as law enforcement officers, but as people who understood that justice sometimes looks different than punishment. The ceremony began with a prayer from Pastor Williams, who'd stood by our family despite learning the truth about my past. His words spoke of forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility that even the greatest sins could be transformed into purpose. Then Agent Chen stepped to the podium. "We're here today to honor the memory of American soldiers who died during covert intelligence operations in Vietnam," she said. "But we're also here to witness something unprecedented, a group of veterans taking responsibility for their actions and working to ensure that the truth is preserved for future generations." One by one, each member of the Ghosts of Charlie Company stepped forward to speak. They told their stories, not to justify what they'd done, but to help people understand how young men could make such terrible choices and how they'd lived with the consequences ever since. When my turn came, I looked out at the crowd of families, at Tyler and Eleanor and Marcus, at the memorial wall with its roll call of the dead. "My name is Harold Brennan," I said. "Harold," my voice carrying across the park. 57 years ago, I was a 23-year-old soldier who made the worst decision of his life. I traded military intelligence to enemy agents in exchange for drugs, and 114 American soldiers died because of information I provided. I paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Some were crying, others were angry, but all were listening. For 57 years, I've tried to atone for what I did by building a good life, by being a faithful husband and a loving father and grandfather. But I've learned that real atonement requires more than just living well. It requires truth, even when that truth is painful. I gestured to the 6 men standing with me. These men and I formed a brotherhood of shame, but we've discovered that sharing our burden has transformed it into something else, a commitment to ensure that future generations understand the true cost of war. Not just for those who die, but for those who survive with impossible choices on their consciences. Tyler stepped forward and joined me at the podium. "My grandfather isn't asking for forgiveness," he said, his young voice strong and clear. "He's not asking anyone to forget what he did or to excuse his actions. He's asking for the chance to turn his shame into education, his guilt into purpose." He looked at me with eyes that held pain but also love. 3 months ago, I thought my grandfather was a hero. Then I learned he was something much more complicated, a human being who made terrible mistakes and spent the rest of his life trying to make amends. And I've realized that maybe that's a harder thing to be than a hero. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the new memorial plaque. As the covering fell away, I read the words engraved in stone. "In memory of all soldiers who died during covert operations in Vietnam, 1968-1969. They served with honor. They died as heroes. They will not be forgotten." Below the inscription were 114 names. Each name represented a life cut short, a family destroyed, a future stolen. but each name also represented a promise that their deaths would be remembered, honored, and used to teach future generations about the true cost of war. After the ceremony, families began to approach us. Some came to express anger, others to ask questions, a few to offer something I'd never expected: understanding. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 80s and frail but still fiery, walked up to me with tears in her eyes. "Harold," she said, "I hated you for 3 months. Hated you for what you did to my Robert, for the burden you placed on our family." Mrs. Patterson, "Let me finish," she said firmly. "I hated you until I realized that you've been carrying the same burden Robert carried. You've been living with the same guilt, the same shame, the same nightmares. And Harold, you've been carrying it alone." She reached out and took my hand with fingers that shook with age and emotion. "Robert had me. He had our children and grandchildren who loved him despite his mistakes. But you've been facing this alone for 57 years, trying to protect your family from the truth that was eating you alive." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," I said. "No," she agreed, "you don't. None of us deserve forgiveness for what we've done to each other over the years. But Harold, maybe that's what makes forgiveness so powerful. Maybe that's what makes it worth giving." As the sun set over the memorial park, I found myself surrounded by my family and by the families of soldiers who died because of my actions. We were an unlikely group, victims and perpetrators, the guilty and the innocent, the young and the old. But we were also something more. A community of people who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies, healing over hatred. Agent Chen approached as we prepared to leave. "Mr. Brennan, the Congressional Committee wants you to testify again next month about wartime trauma, about the need for better support systems for veterans dealing with PTSD and addiction." I nodded. "I'll be there." "There's something else," she said. "The Department of Veterans Affairs wants to work with you to develop educational programs for young soldiers. Programs that teach them about the consequences of compromising their integrity, even under extreme duress." I thought about young soldiers, 23 years old like I'd been, facing impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Maybe my story could help them understand that there are always alternatives to betrayal. Always options other than selling your soul for temporary relief from pain. "I'd be honored," I said. As we walked back to our cars, Tyler fell into step beside me. "Grandpa, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think Bobby Kessler found peace at the end? Do you think he understood that destroying other people's lives didn't heal his own pain?" I thought about Bobby Kessler's final days, dying alone in a hospital bed, facing federal charges for decades of extortion, his legacy reduced to the harm he'd caused to families who'd been struggling with the same guilt he carried. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But Tyler, I hope so. I hope that in his final moments, he understood that we were all victims of the same war, all struggling with the same impossible burden. I hope he found forgiveness for himself, even if he couldn't find it for the rest of us." Eleanor took my other arm as we reached our car. "Where to now?" she asked. I looked back at the memorial wall, at the names carved in stone, at the promise we'd made to honor the dead by living truthfully. "Home," I said. "We're going home." But as we drove through the streets of Springfield, I realized that home meant something different now. It wasn't just the house where Eleanor and I had built our life together. It was the peace that comes from finally telling the truth, the redemption that grows from accepting responsibility for your actions, and the love of a family strong enough to survive the revelation of your deepest shame. At 80 years old, I'd finally learned that the dose I needed to double wasn't money or drugs or even forgiveness from others. The dose I needed to double was truth. And truth, it turned out, was the only medicine that could finally heal wounds that had been festering for 57 years. The cycle was broken at last.